it's been said at the table today, we don't really know what's going on, but what do you think is going on? First of all, with respect to the 14 years since the implementation and the lack of action, you say on the regulation, and secondly, what is going on with creating this water strategy document now? Why do something that you say is covering something that's already been done? Why is the government taking these actions?
That's the question I'd like to have an answer to. I have no idea why. We've got, as I said, we've got a comprehensive legislative framework with the Clean Water Act, the Clean Environment Act, 9 regulations, comprehensive regulations with the Clean Water Act designed to protect our water, both our surface waters and our groundwaters, with a regulation yet to be implemented around water classification for our rivers and streams. What's the problem? That's the question. If we were in the House, I could ask that question period. And in fact, you know, when we get back to the House, I will ask that question, because we actually are going to be returning on the 29th for 8 days. So it's exactly the question I'll pose. I have no idea what's going on here, and where this came from, why they're pursuing it, and why they are rushing through a process that is so elementary. I mean, the discussion paper is elementary to the extreme, and the process is unacceptable. I mean, open houses, surely we left those behind.
And I guess a follow-up question to perhaps all members, or everyone sitting at the table, is these open houses, how much did you know about them in advance? Did you know about all of them? And were you involved in any of them? Just in general,
I must say, now I'm a citizen now more than I used to be as a government official, and so things go by. And I didn't have much knowledge of this strategy at all until very, very recently. And I was able to pick it up on the computer and start from there. That's what got me going in the last perhaps 2 weeks, I would say. Maybe 3 at the longest. And I do believe that there's not enough discussion. David has more than amply indicated and spoken to the time and how much should go in it to do it right. And that does disturb me greatly. That and the fact that this regulation that we have, the acts that David has pointed out, the 2 acts and the 9 regulations, do cover a great deal of distance in getting the job done. There may be some other pieces that could be added in a new regulations of one form or another, but those need to be discussed. Water management is a large area. It covers many aspects. But certainly in terms of basin management, river watershed management, the piece that we put together in 2002 with the classification procedures and especially the state of Maine's process, we copied their process, we brought officials up here, and we went down there and we talked with them at length. The piece of legislation is crafted right after their legislation in good measure. So I feel that to have this now is redundant and unnecessary. That's kind of the way I feel about it.
And in terms of your participation among the 4 of you at least, were any of you at any of these open houses?
No,
No.
never heard of them till today.
Margaret was?
No, I was.
You were, Lawrence?
Yes.
And at one or more of them?
I was at the one in Miramichi. I will be in the one in Fredericton tomorrow. I went to Miramichi to get a feeling for the process because I had the concerns that I stated today about the process. And I wanted to see how that worked out in practice. And pretty well it worked out in practice as I expected it to. Input was very controlled. You were constrained to speak on 2 columns of a flip chart, which was challenges and actions to address those challenges. The 2-hour time limit, basically I invited myself because these meetings are by invitation only generally. I heard about them and just invited myself by getting registered, and they allowed me to come. I acknowledge that. The participants were mainly from watershed associations, a couple of people from planning commissions who were concerned about some aspects. But the items on the flip chart seem to be wander all over the place, and I found the answers coming from the Department of Environment facilitators lacking in substance or real concrete proposals for addressing the issues. So going forward, the alarm bells were on in my brain, the caution lights on, and I subsequently have gone public trying to alert the public in my network that these meetings are unsatisfactory and really a step backwards in terms of public consultation, because as we've seen, the impartial commissions and the Ombudsman's report, that getting somebody on the outside of the process to look at the situation is more effective and more unbiased than working with salaried staff within the department.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a question? I'm working with Redmond. I wanted to ask David Coombs, is there a risk in participating in these strategy sessions of sealing essentially the casket on water classification, and then does that not permit the government to say, then we've dealt with this and we're going ahead with a new strategy, essentially resetting the clock to go back another 14 years and we can start all over again?
Well, they can try it, but it won't have any credibility with the people of the province. I mean, certainly, for example, just the people that I represent in my riding, I expect many have not heard of this, and secondly, would be quite appalled to learn that this process is starting as if from scratch, when we've got strong legislation in place already, comprehensive legislation, some of it still to be implemented, like water classification. But, you know, the thing that strikes me is the laws and regulations governing water and everything else in this province belong to the people in the province through the Legislative Assembly. Those laws are debated and passed through the Legislative Assembly. They don't belong to the Premier's office or the Executive Council. They belong to the legislature. And so they're talking about potentially fundamental changes here to those laws and regulations. That discussion needs to happen in the legislative realm and within the legislative branch of government and the people of this province. And that's not what's happening. Instead, it's gone out through the department. You know, when the official languages law was reviewed, it was done through a legislative committee with hearings. It wasn't the minister responsible sending out departmental staff to hold open houses around the province. Because it's a piece of legislation from the Legislative Assembly. So I think it sends a very dangerous, sets a dangerous precedent again, in the sense of having a line department to undertake this in a way that could have significant implications for the legislative framework for protecting our water supplies in New Brunswick.
Is there any reason to be able to expect a different outcome or a better outcome in terms of water protection without the government coming clean on why water classification has been abandoned?
Absolutely not. We need to know, we need some truth finally on that. Why water classification, I mean, this looks like an effort to kill it off completely, but why it's never been implemented beyond lakes and impoundments, and two, what was the rationale in the first place for doing this water strategy? Why now? What's going on? That's not provided in the discussion paper whatsoever. What's the reason? What are the problems this is trying to address? Until we know what the problems are that this is trying to address, then we're not going to be able to come up with something that's effective.
Is it not also the case that the Ombudsman has pointed out that the provisional classification of waters in lakes, it can't be any more effective than the non-classification of waters for rivers for the same reason. You can't provisionally classify a lake using the same legislation that you turn around and say isn't enforceable on running water. on flowing
Right,
water.
well, it's contradictory, of course, and we know that it's worked effectively in Maine, and essentially that regulation was lifted from the state of Maine, or modeled on what was done in the state of Maine. And here we've got, I mean, this crazy situation on the St. Croix River where they've got water classification for half the river, if you can, the American half of the river. And if you've ever paddled or tubed down that river, you know what it's like. You're trying to stay on this side of the line. On the side of the line, it's unclassified. You float on the other side of the line, and it's classified. It's protected.
Did you have any more questions, Brendan?
Thank you, Assistant.
I could add that the ponds and lakes and impoundments are not provisional classifications. They are actual classifications that are embedded within the Act. They are law now. Half of all those bodies of water are now under law and should be regulated as such. And I don't know, I don't think the department, I don't know what they're doing with them, but they are there. So the newer part of that, the river basins, the rivers themselves could be classified as provisional, and that is the goals that we're going to set in there, and then that has to go to the minister to be put in an order, and that would then be classified, and then they would be law. But that's the hurdle that we haven't been able to get over. We've got all of the lakes, the ponds, and the impoundments have come in. Think about how much of the water bodies in the province of New Brunswick is already under law under the classification regulation. Think about the millions of dollars that have been spent here and the effort put in over 25 years. This government now is throwing it out the window and say we'll have some workshops here and sit down in the next little while and we'll come up with this wonderful thing, whatever it's going to be, without any classification and without any non-point source capability to analyze the kind of extraction things that are going to happen in this province, for sure, in the near future. And we won't have any coverage. If you think about it, it's logistically impossible to go out and drop something in the water, measure the water at an instant in time, and say that's going to prevail through the whole year. It isn't going to happen. Runoff is going to happen. As they say, I won't go into the words of the lettering, begins with S, but it happens. And it will end up in the river at some time. And so the little bugs there, if they're there, as Maine has said, they're there for that whole summer period. They're watching and they're measuring, and some of them disappear. Some stay. That's what you're looking for. Who can stay and who disappears, and then you run the model and say, this watershed is not meeting the provisional standards that the groups have put forward that they would like to see. That's what happens. So, and that's a big problem, because if they had done that, if they had put the thing through with the minister in the 19 basins, the groups would all have been able to put together action plans that would have corrected things through with all the best management practices the department prepared for forestry, for agriculture, etc., on non-point sources. So there you go. How are we going to do this in 3 weeks or whatever this limited time period is, and then why? We've got already, we're reinventing the wheel, we're using extensive resources, more, as someone has pointed out here. Are we going to go back through this thing, do another 18 years of work in 3 weeks? It won't happen. And so the reality here just doesn't fit with what is actually taking place here under this strategy. That's my take on it.
Yeah.